Well, the Seahawks won, and I don't know how it was where you were watching the game, but where I was watching the game, there was a lot of good advice being yelled at the television about what they should do or should not do, or how bad the commercials were. There was just a lot of advice going out. And I don't know that there were any really big Seahawk fans. I think there were maybe some Patriot fans that were kind of covert, but there wasn't really like a big determined. But I have noticed in the world of sports, at least, there's a lot of fans that had a lot of big opinions. And if you go, you watch Stephen A. or you go online, help you, but I mean, people got big opinions about what should be done in the world of sports, right? And there's a lot of fans. But in the midst of all of that, even as we see the big opinions, it's mostly from people that could never do what the folks are doing on the court or on the field. And I think about myself all the time. I mentioned last week when I'm watching the Olympics, I watched the half pipe this week. Did anybody watch the half pipe? Right? Insane. I mean, and then I know we're all secretly waiting for them to crash out, right? We're all kind of wanting them to fail because that's really wild to watch. They walk away from it. But the ones that successfully like spin and flip, I watched the women's half pipe this week and I was like, how are they doing this? I don't even understand how they're doing this. Luge, I get. You kind of just lay there, it looks like to me. But curling, I've swept a floor before, but wow, the flips and stuff in the air on a snowboard, I'm just blown away by. So anyway, I was watching that and I was thinking, I've got, and then they kind of miss a little bit and they start, tearing them apart. Oh, she's going to get a 6 because she didn't land it exactly. I'm like, I know that's right. And again, I'm like, what's wrong with me? I just preached about this last week. Stop it. Stop being so critical of these athletes. And the funny thing is, fans admire athletes or teams. I've gotten to the point where I really admire the team and coaches. Pop I always talk about him as my favorite coaches in the NBA. I admire those people, but I don't really do much outside of just admiring them. And so I want to talk about the difference and compare and contrast the difference today between fans and followers, because there's a difference between the people that were following Jesus around and just kind of fans of his work, and the people that followed Jesus with their life, dedicated their life. And even when things get hard and things got rough, and even to death, they were willing to follow Jesus. There's a big difference between those kind of stories. So a lot of folks were comfortable believing in Jesus, watching the miracles and saying, yeah, that looks really good, and that's exciting. They were maybe the entertainment factor of it, maybe just the sheer miraculous nature of it, stuff they'd never seen before. They were interested in Jesus. And today we have a lot of people that know a lot about Jesus. They'll study it, right? They'll read these systematic theologies, which are these books that kind of, take a lot of different ideas and try to systematize them into a way of understanding. There's whole systems and theologians that have created some really interesting takes on this, and very intelligent people. PhD level people that study this stuff and know all these data and facts. And what we have seen, however, is there's a difference in knowing a lot about Jesus and being a fan of him and get his signature and he's a celebrity and all that, and actually doing what Jesus said to do. Those are different things. And I think for a long time we didn't understand that. We thought, well, if you know a lot about Jesus and you can talk a good game, then probably you are following him. The problem is those are not connected in the same way. And I tried to bring that out a little bit last week in talking about this idea of, we know what to do with our finances, we know what to eat, we know how to exercise, and yet a lot of us don't do those things on a way that benefits ourselves positively. And so in the same way, just knowing a lot of facts and information about Jesus, while impressive, doesn't say anything about if we are following or not, because it takes faith to follow Jesus. It takes trusting him to follow him before you see the whole picture. And today I'm going to talk to you from a story in John chapter 2, which is one of my favorite miracles, partially because it's an early miracle, and because I think it doesn't stand out as much as the other miracles. Sometimes we kind of push this one aside because it's changing water into wine, and we're like, that seems more like a party trick than bringing someone back from the dead, right? or, healing someone of a terrible disease. And so this one doesn't get talked about as much sometimes, but there's some really cool language here that happens that I think really will help us understand how we get to be a part of what Jesus is doing. So in John chapter 2, I'm going to share about this wedding in Cana with you, and I'm reading from the New Living Translation as we read this story. So just listen to this idea. It said, the next day there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities. So Jesus' mother told them, they have no more wine. Or told him, rather, they have no more wine. So then Jesus replies to her, verse 4, dear woman, that's not our problem. I don't know. Just for an aside there, I think if I ever said to my mom, dear woman, I don't think that would have gone well. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, my time has not yet come. But his mother told the servants, she didn't get offended. She says, do whatever he tells you. Now that's a key sentence there. Mary, the mother of Jesus, says, do to the servants that were there, do whatever he tells you. Standing nearby, it says, were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing, and each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, fill the jars with water. And they did that. And when the jars had been filled, he said, now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies. So they did that, probably wondering, why are we serving water? When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, though of course the servants knew, they had witnessed this, he called the bridegroom over. A host always serves the best wine first, he said. Then when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now. This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples. Now, several things jump out at me. I already pointed out a few of them. I'm not going to talk to my mama that way, but that's okay. He's Jesus. But his point was made, right? And I think the really critical thing is here, why is this the first miracle? Like if I was planning it, like if I was the PR guy for Jesus, this is not the way that I would have written it up, right? I would do a boom first, and then we would trickle down to some of the lower things like, water into wine. I would have started off with a resurrection. You get the word going. But he didn't start off with that. He started off with this. And I think one of the most critical things in the story that sometimes we overlook is how this miracle took place. Because the miracles happen in different ways, and yet in this one, Jesus works with these people who Mary has said to them, do whatever he says to do. And they do it. And because they do what Jesus says to do, they get to be a part of the miracle, the first miracle that Jesus ever did. I love in the fact that it says, he's revealing his glory for the first time to his disciples and to the world. And they're getting a sense here. He's teaching a lesson. Don't miss the lesson. One of those, which is, if you do what Jesus says, you get to be included in what Jesus is doing. That's huge. Like he didn't need them to do the miracle. He did not need these people to fill bottle or the jugs of water. He did not need this help. And yet he included them. And it had to sound kind of crazy to them that they're like, okay, well, we're out of wine, so let's go get some water and then take that water and give it to the master of ceremonies. I mean, that could have been some trouble for them. Like, what's going on here? And yet they just did what Jesus said. The Bible says the servants followed his instruction. John wants us to know that the servants followed Jesus' instructions. And somewhere between filling and the pouring, somewhere in there, the miracle happened. Water became wine in there somewhere. Not just any wine, not cheap wine, but the master said, wow, the best wine. Like the guys in charge is like, this is amazing. Why didn't you bring this out earlier? The servants did not create the miracle. They didn't have the power. They didn't have the ability. We don't know a lot of details of what their feeling were, but if I was them, I would be very worried about what I'm doing. And yet Jesus allowed them to play a part in the miracle. In fact, they were the first ones that knew a miracle had taken place. When we do what Jesus says, we get to become a part of what he is doing. And the faith part of that is doing what Jesus says without understanding how to connect all the dots, without seeing where we're going, without understanding exactly how it's all going to play out. We trust Jesus. This is what it means to have faith in Jesus. I think for me as a Gen Xer, one of the easiest ways to describe this is in a movie of my childhood, and that is The Karate Kid. And if you've ever seen this movie, The Real Karate Kid, I'm just saying, it's the original. You got to this part in the movie, and I remember being confused because Mr. Miyagi, the guy that's teaching Danielson about the karate, he is having him do silly stuff around the house, right? Chores. And it's like, what is going on here? And in this particular scene, wax on, wax off on the car, and Daniel's getting very frustrated. Like he wants to learn karate, not how to do chores. And you don't learn till later in the movie that what he has taught him is actually a blocking move. And he's got it so kind of, if you think about how you connect your mind to your actions, you get kind of in a spot where it's all connected, and it just became kind of second nature that he was able to block. And so it like made sense at that point. But he had to put a lot of trust in his mentor here that he was actually teaching him something that would be valuable. It paid off. And so the question I have for you today is, if you can take yourself out for a moment of everything going on in your life and think about what are the jars maybe that Christ is asking you to fill? What is it he's asking you to trust him in right now that you are being a little bit standoffish and not wanting to trust him because you'd like to see the whole picture first? You'd like to know exactly how it's going to end up before you trust him, which isn't trust, right? That's not faith. That's not trust. Saying, tell me exactly how it's all going to pan out and then I'll trust you, that doesn't make any sense. That's just you seeing the future, right? Trust means I trust that Jesus is who he says he is, that he can do what he said he could do, and that he was resurrected, came back to life, and because of that, I can put my trust in him. And I can do that in little ways, and I can learn to trust him over time, but it's not about me filling everything out on my own. It's about gradually filling these jars day by day, small actions, and then suddenly when Jesus moves, I go, oh, that's what I was waiting on. What would it be like for you? Think about your situation in your life to follow Jesus with trust, with faith, not focusing on yourself and what you're capable of, but what is Jesus capable of. William Booth, who founded Salvation Army, once said, "The greatness of a man's power is in the measure of his surrender." This is countercultural to our culture that tells us that the greatness of a man is in the measure of his worth, his stuff, his power, his prowess, his looks, his strength. And Booth said, no. The real greatness, the thing that you really desire, is in how much you're willing to surrender to God. How much will you really be willing to give over? Because at the end of the day, when we do what Jesus says to do, when we are very simple people and do what Jesus says to do, not try to work ways around it, we get to be a part of what he is doing. I can tell you story after story in the New Testament of people that walked right up to this line and then decided, I'm just not going to do what Jesus says. And they didn't get to be a part of what Jesus was doing, right? We could talk about well-known people like Judas. We could talk about lesser-known people like the rich young ruler. There are story after story building this narrative in the New Testament of people that knew what Jesus expected of them and just chose not to trust, not to have the faith in him, and did not get to be a part of what he was doing. I think it's interesting what Mary says, the mother of Jesus, to the servants. Now, again, I don't know the culture exactly, like, of him speaking that way, but woman instead of mom or mama, I don't know. But like, to me, it would have caused a pause in a situation, right? But she doesn't miss a beat. She doesn't skip a beat. She just says, do whatever he tells you to do. So, what would it look like for you to be a person of prayer and a person of preparation, and a person who is willing to say yes when Jesus gives you clear direction. Now that can be fuzzy, right? It can be difficult to find that direction. But what if you are a person of prayer and preparation and patience, like you wait for that, and when that opportunity comes that you know is clear because it is something that clearly we have been given an expectation to do, you actually did what Jesus asks us to do. You loved the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your soul, and your strength. You loved your neighbor as yourself. And what if in doing that, you got to be a part of something way bigger than yourself, way bigger than you can afford to do, way bigger than you could plan or dream or imagine up in your mind, bigger than all of that, and you got to be a part of something huge. Well, that's what the disciples of Jesus found. They learned that lesson on the first miracle, that if we do what Jesus tells us, we get to be a part of what Jesus is doing. And what Jesus is doing is changing the world. He is the Messiah. So, what if you read the words of Jesus this week? You spent some time in the Bible. You spent some time in prayer and some time in listening and reflecting, and then you took action. What would that look like for you? There's a multitude of different ways to do this. That's what's really cool. It's not like there's just one thing. I'm not telling you everybody has to go out and do this one thing this week. But what would it look like for you to be in Scripture some this week, to be in prayer some this week, to listen, to spend some time just, here I am, God. And if you don't get an immediate response, that's okay. Trust that process and be persevering through that and be ready to act when the opportunity comes up. There's so many times we go through life just so consumed in our own little world that we don't get to be a part of these bigger things because we got blinders on. Whether it's the phone or it's work or it's the chaos of the world or a relational problem or a financial concern or a health thing, we block out everything. And I know in those times in my life when that's happened, I know there's things I've missed because the times that I'm more open, there's opportunities all over. And I miss those, and I regret those times. And I go, that's a gnashing of teeth moment for me where I'm like, oh man, what did I miss out on? I could have been a part of something so much bigger than the worries of this day that were meaningless for me because I had no way to affect change, but I could have changed someone's life. I could have been a part of their story. I could have been a part of the bigger thing Jesus was wanting to do. So what would it look like for you to have the courage to follow Jesus and do what he invites you to do?